I'm not confident that a 18-year-old now today could make actually a coherent argument against racism, because they never have to do it. Never heard one, right? It's just ban, ban, ban. And that, that is what is making us, it's going to make us stupid in the long term.
Hello and welcome to TRIGGERnometry. I'm Francis Foster.
I'm Konstantin Kisin.
And this is the show for you if you're bored with people arguing on the internet over subjects they know nothing about. At TRIGGERnometry, we don't pretend to be the experts, we ask the experts.
Our brilliant guest this week is a staff writer at Spiked Online and the host of the Spiked podcast, Fraser. Welcome to TRIGGERnometry.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you here. We've been meaning to get you on for a while, and we're glad that you're here. For anyone who doesn't know you, just tell us very quickly, who are you, what's your background, how are you where you are?
So I write for Spiked, which I think is the best magazine in the world. Probably the only magazine standing up today for, absolute free speech, democracy, no ifs, no buts, and for, a very humanist, pro-human centered outlook.
Have you read The Guardian?
Yeah, I have. We've had a few run-ins with them, and I guess, it's I have kind of a funny journey, I guess. I'm a massive Brexit supporter, so I might as well get that out now.
Well, when you said democracy, no if, no buts, I think everybody got the hidden message.
Yeah.
Well, you'd hope so. But I guess I'm not a typical. Well, I didn't have the typical journey to being a Brexiteer. I speak 2 foreign languages. I speak French and German. I studied them at university, and it's funny because it was actually while I was on my year abroad doing the Erasmus thing that is supposed to turn me into the perfect EU citizen, Remainer type. That was also the year where things were really hitting the fan in Europe, and that was when certain doubts about this wonderful European Union started to creep in.
Yeah, the French will do that to you. Well,
and it was really funny because it was actually a lot of it was while I was in Germany, and nothing bad was really happening there.
Yeah,
but lots of bad things were happening in Greece, and you could see that not only had a referendum been ignored over the proposed bailouts, but there was going to be austerity for the next 70 years proposed by the European Union. So these kind of things are like, oh, maybe this isn't what I thought it is. I'd always been a sort of maybe back then I was a bit wet, but I've always been a kind of lefty type, and I could start to see that was not really fitting in with my ideals. And then we kind of fast forward to 2016, didn't think about it that much. And then suddenly we have this referendum on the EU question, and it just suddenly becomes really obvious, what am I going to vote for? Well, I'm going to vote to leave, because it's, what else would you do? Where I live with my friends, from all well-educated, living in London, you stick out a bit like a sore thumb, but, all pro-Remain, even if they kind of understood my arguments, they'd say, oh, you're different. You have different arguments. That's not why other people are voting leave. But actually, if you talk to people across the country who voted for Brexit, the same things keep coming up, and the main things are, democracy and sovereignty. A few people are interested in immigration, but actually that's bound up in the democracy question, because that's something that's been taken off the table for so long in this country. You cannot have an open debate about immigration, and even if you did, you can't change the policy anyway. So what would be the point?
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And we started with Brexit. We want to stay away from that as much as we can.
Sure.
But there is something it's part of a bigger thing.
Yeah.
And one of the things about you speaking French and German is you've done a lot of great reporting on the Gilets Jaunes, the yellow vests in France. And we really wanted to talk to you at length about that. So for anyone who just watched the BBC News one time a couple of months ago and said, oh, some French people don't want to work again.
Yeah.
That is accurate, isn't it?
That pretty much is accurate. Is it just that, or is there a bit more to it?
I think, obviously it's part of a wider European populist revolt. And Brexit is one part of that. There's things going on in Italy, things, even in countries like Sweden, where we don't even expect there to be populist revolts. I mean, this is the French reaction. This is their version of it, I suppose. It is extraordinary. I mean, it's not just a handful of people turning up protesting. This has been going on at the time of recording for 26 weeks. Every weekend, people have gone out in, whatever the weather, including the winter. It started in November, and stood there and tried to make themselves visible. That's one of the exciting things about the Gilets Jaunes, is that you cannot ignore these people anymore. They're there. These are people who have been ignored in politics for a very long time. They don't live in the cities, so they're not, connected into either the global economy or democratic politics. They live in the kind of peripheries. They're, as I often say, just because they're peripheral to the cities, that means they've also become peripheral to politics in many ways. They're not listened to. Their living standards are either stagnating or in decline, and nobody cares, or nobody cared until they started to make their voices heard.
And now, this is going to sound flippant, but there's a more serious point behind this. The French have always liked kicking off, haven't they? I mean, they always have. They've always liked a bit of a row. They've always loved a strike.
This episode of the podcast is just going to be me and you being racist against French people.
But that's acceptable. You can do that.
The French like onions and
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a flippant comment, but there's a certain amount of truth to it. And how much is it that they do like, getting upset, throwing a strike, and how much of this is actually a genuine working class revolt against the upper classes?
Well, I think you have to think about the scale of it. I mean, yes, you're right. French people do protest a lot more than we do. For instance, they do go on strike a lot more than we do, and I think that's good on them personally. Why should they put up with anything less than what they deserve? But the scale of it. I mean, this is the biggest revolt since 1968. Since the Les Événements, as they call them, which changed French society, enormously. It changed, it basically ushered in the kind of modern era of, how we think of France today. And this is actually bigger, potentially. You're talking, it started off with 200,000 people, you had hundreds of thousands of people after that, still tens of thousands of people going out week in, week out. It's been going on for over 5 months. And what's extraordinary to me is the way that it just doesn't really get the kind of coverage you expect. You mentioned the BBC earlier. If this were Venezuela or something, it would be on television every day. But it's only happening across the channel. It's not difficult for a journalist to go over there like I did. I spent £35 to get on a coach to go to Paris to go talk to people. It's not hard. But that's not really happening. And it's quite funny because there are these kind of rumours going around the internet, and people have asked me, there's a rumour in Britain that there's a D notice on the Gilets Jaunes. The government has banned, newspapers from reporting on it, and people have asked me about that. Completely untrue. The truth is much sadder. People are just not interested. People in our establishment are not interested. People in the French establishment have to be interested because they're afraid of them, and they're afraid of what might happen next. But there is a recognition that these are the kind of wrong kind of people. These are the famous deplorables, the French deplorables, if you like. And so their needs, their interests, their demands do just sort of fall on deaf ears in a way.
And what is it all about? Is it like a French Brexit where these are people who are against the EU? Or is it much more about, as you said, the kind of people who've lost out through globalization, just wanting to, have a job, have a house, have a secure, stable future for themselves and their children, maybe opposed to immigration? Just tell us a little bit about what is the core of their concerns? Yeah,
I think the EU plays into it, and the EU has played a role in the diminishing of their living standards, and certainly the euro in the last 10 years has made it very difficult for the French economy and the French government to adapt to various changes, and that has had a real serious problem. There's serious economic causes. Lots of people are, not only is there high unemployment, but people sort of know that if they lose their job now, that's it. These are people who have quite stagnant careers. they don't even have careers at all. They have jobs, not careers. You know, there's no advancement. And a lot of them feel, some of them are, you know, nearing retirement age, and they have a sense that things aren't going to be better for the next generation, and that's intolerable, and we need to do something about it. And, you know, in my view, I don't think that the problems of the French economy can be fixed within the European Union. There are some people in the Gilets Jaunes who are explicitly anti-EU. There is a big crossover as well in the people who are protesting against the Gilets Jaunes and those who voted in 2015. In 2015, the French were asked to ratify the European Constitution, and most of them said no. They voted against it. It was then repackaged as the Lisbon Treaty and forced through onto them anyway. So, and there is a crossover between many of the people who are the Gilets Jaunes who will have voted against that European Constitution. But things are a lot less clear-cut because you know, it's a leaderless movement. It doesn't have an official manifesto. So it's hard to say that there is any specific demands other than a more general demand for greater living standards and a greater say in politics.
And there's been criticisms from certain aspects, or from certain parts of the left, who've said that the Gilets Jaunes is a far right-wing, anti-immigration, you know, whatever, pro-Frexit, I think it is, movement. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think it's interesting because the far-right slur came out, you know, basically from the French government within hours of people turning up on the streets. These people, as I said before, you know, these are the deplorables. These people don't have to open their mouth before someone has decided that they're far right. And actually, you know, if you look at the police reports, there's no significant far right influence. There's the far left have started to get a bit more interested in the Gilets Jaunes, which, you know, fine. And there's also been, you know, some attempts by the trade union movement to make links with the Gilets Jaunes. But the idea that these people are far right is ludicrous. I mean, some of them will have voted for the National Front in the past, you know, but then what other options did they have? You know, it's like many people will have voted for UKIP. I don't think it's because they're necessarily racist or anything like that, but they have, you know, concerns that are not being addressed, or, you know, they want an alternative to all the other parties that are all exactly the same. And when I went out there, it was interesting. You know, I tried not to put ideas into anyone's heads. So I just asked people what they were there for. And it wasn't even that, nobody even mentioned immigration, right? So it's not even like, I agree, it's not racist to discuss immigration or even, you know, want immigration controls. I take a different view, but I don't think it's racist. They didn't even mention it. So I don't really see where this far-right idea comes from, other than as a kind of slur to dismiss these people as, you know, irrelevant and people that don't need to be listened to.
It has become a bit of a slur, and it's interesting. Francis and I talk a lot about the working class on the show as well. I wrote an article, I think you read in Spectator, about far-right being used as a slur. This will be a few weeks ago now. And one of the comments on it was, far-right is now a label that people use to describe the working class. And I thought that was quite an interesting way of looking at it, because whenever, you know, if a member of the elite rebels against the mainstream narrative, it's handled one way. But if you have a large populist uprising of people who don't agree with the mainstream narrative, they are automatically far right.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely accurate. And I think, you know, a good example of that might be the Football Lads Alliance in Britain. You know, nobody really knew what they were about, but they were declared far right straight away. You know, what were they against? They were against terrorism. I mean, I think we're all against terrorism, aren't we?
I didn't realize you needed a group for that.
Do you need? Yeah, I mean, you know, but in fairness, you know, they want to make their voices heard because they don't think the issue's being taken seriously. But you know, it's very strange that to be opposed to Islamists blowing children to bits in a pop concert is a far right position. I mean, it's bizarre. It's just, I think what it represents is the way that the working class. I mean, not only have, you know, they lost out economically over the last 30 years or whatever, but their status culturally has really been diminished, you know. And I think this is true of the Gilets Jaunes, it's true of the Brexiteers. It's like these people are gammon, they're scum, they're uneducated, they don't understand the world, they don't understand how things should be. And I think that the slur far right just it embodies the way that these people are just not seen as important or worth listening to.
What I find dangerous about that is that there are people who are far right.
Of course, yeah.
And then you get those two confused, and suddenly no one knows what far right means anymore, because we do need the label of far right for people who are far right.
Yeah.
We have to be able to go, no, these people believe in white supremacy or killing Jews or whatever, and they're different. But when you start to label massive groups of people, then that's a problem.
Oh, it absolutely is a problem. And the problem is, I think, with the Gilets Jaunes and with Brexit in this country, is a lot of it is, like you said, is because people don't feel that they're represented. Nobody cares about them. And that the only way that they've got in order to make their voices heard is to literally go out on the streets, make themselves as visible as possible in order to have their voices heard. And that's a really dangerous situation politically to be in.
That's right. And it's true that, across Europe, the mainstream parties have been becoming more and more distant from the public, and in particular the people they're supposed to represent. So this is a particular problem for the left, for the Labour. Well, it's emerging as a problem for the Labour Party. For the centre-left parties in Europe have been absolutely massacred over the past couple of years. You see the Socialist Party in France goes from being in government to winning only around 10% or something in the elections. Similar things happening in Greece with their centre-left party, and in the Netherlands as well. And in the Netherlands and in Italy, the Democratic Party, again sort of centre-left, Blairite party, completely massacred in the polls. And there is this enormous distance between especially the centre-left parties and who are now sort of representing a more middle-class, urban intelligentsia rather than a kind of working-class base. And it's really interesting that they wish that they didn't have to represent these working-class people, actually. It's not that they're fretting about losing them particularly. Maybe some people are, but they almost feel morally tainted by having to represent these horrible working class people who are far right and hate immigrants and are homophobic, whatever, which they're not, of course. And you can really see that actually it's really crystal clear in America with the Democrats. And if you listen to Democratic pollsters, there's this big argument between them as to whether they should even bother to represent the white working class. And there are people that say, we don't need them to win. We should just focus on these people. And there are obviously other more sensible people who say, well, we should be representing them anyway because they're working class people. That's what we're for, by the way. But there are genuinely people making arguments that, the demographics are going to deliver us, election victory after election victory anyway. Why do we need to bother with these deplorable people? And it's like they don't want their votes. It's like if those people vote for them, they're evil and tainted. It's completely bizarre.
It's weird in this country as well, isn't it? Because Jeremy Corbyn, that's exactly the direction that Labour has gone under Corbyn. And Corbyn is an old trade unionist.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, the Labour has become more middle. The acceleration of Labour becoming a bourgeois party has happened faster under Corbyn than under Blair, which is extraordinary. Yeah. Extraordinary because there are many. The way that Corbyn is presented in the media is like he's kind of an old lefty, that could. I think with the right policies, with the right attitudes, could really have won back a lot of, the Labour heartlands, working class people in the north. But they're just not interested. They're much more interested in satisfying their kind of Remainer, London, educated base.
I think one of the worst things about Corbyn is the fact that he's not honest about who he is, in that he's pro-Brexit. And everybody knows he's pro-Brexit. It's like when Barry Manilow was like, hey, I'm straight. Everybody was like, no. But it's that same thing.
I think he is he has performed the biggest betrayal, in a way, of the two party leaders. Theresa May was a Remainer, still a Remainer, still wants to deliver a Remain. But Corbyn has completely sold out his principles, and there are other people in the top Corbyn team who are Brexiteers too. They come from the Tony Benn school of Euroscepticism, which I think is, really, that's kind of my view on it, where you'd rather have a bad parliament than a good king. His view was that we only lend politicians the vote and they shouldn't give, we lend politicians their power and for them to give it up to someone else who's unaccountable is unacceptable. So Corbyn kind of comes from that tradition, but I just don't think he's that interested in it. I think he just has other priorities, and is quite happy to, abandon that particular principle.
Well, yeah, he's got to crack down on the Jews now. But let's come back to the Gilets Jaunes for a moment, just because I thought
you were going to say, let's come back to the Jews.
Yeah, oh, definitely. We can come back to the Jews every day, man. The Gilets Jaunes, one of the things that I think most people may have seen on the news when it happened was the reaction from the government.
Yes.
Because those were some troubling images that we were seeing. This was physical force being used against people who were out there essentially protesting. So tell us a little bit about how the French government responded to these people amassing in the streets of Paris and other major cities and, speaking up for what they were concerned about.
Yeah, well, the response to the Gilets Jaunes has been incredibly authoritarian. And, the numbers of police on the streets on some weekends would actually match the number of protesters. So you'd have 80,000 protesters and 80,000 police. So one policeman per protester. And the police have been, on the whole, incredibly aggressive. They have been, they've caused a number of injuries. They're firing tear gas grenades. They have these weapons called flashballs, which are banned everywhere in Europe apart from France. And these are kind of rubber bullets. And they're supposed to be fired, almost below the waist kind of thing, just that they're supposed to stun people. But the police have been firing them at people's heads, and people have been losing their eyes. Scores of people have lost their eyes and, will never recover from that. People have been losing their hands. There's a really good journalist called David Dufresne on Twitter, and he has been collating all of the police aggressions that he can verify. And when I last checked, it was over 780 incidents of, police aggression that could be verified. And I mean, this is extraordinary. If this were happening in some dictatorship, it would be roundly condemned. It wouldn't be off the television screens, but because it's Macron, who is well liked by, the British establishment, by the establishments in other countries, it's not really talked about. And it's certainly, I'm not aware of the British government having issued any kind of condemnation in a way that they would if it were, some far-flung part of the world. And it's not. It's also important to recognise it's not just the physical authoritarianism. It's not just that people are being beaten up in the streets by police. There has also been crackdowns on social media. There's new laws against so-called fake news. Fake news just means news that the government doesn't like. It's quite interesting that within weeks of that law coming out, a campaign by the French government was banned by Twitter as fake news. So the subjective nature of fake news is obviously there for all to see. They've been Twitter, for instance, have been under pressure from the government, been banning certain activists. The government have also raided the offices of a newspaper called Mediapart. It's a left-wing newspaper, one of the few to stand up for the Gilets Jaunes. And they've been issued with a court order to raid their offices to basically retrieve the sources of all of these journalists, which is a big no-no in the supposedly free world. Marine Le Pen could go to jail for tweeting about ISIS.
What did she say?
I'm trying to think. What did she say? She tweeted some graphic images of ISIS beheadings to say, "Look, this is what ISIS are up to." She could go to jail for that. And she's I don't like Marine Le Pen.
I don't know Marine Le Pen well, but I assume she wasn't like, yeah, let's have more of this, right?
No. She was very much against them.
Yeah,
of course.
I'd imagine. Yeah.
And Marine Le Pen, unpleasant politician, but she could go to jail. Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the leftist leader, his offices have been raided by the police. So there is an extreme authoritarianism, coming over France under the rule of Emmanuel Macron, supposedly the liberal strongman, the person who we were promised was going to stand up against populism and authoritarianism and save Europe and European values. And it makes me incredibly sad to see what's going on over there.
Do you think this is the death throes of the EU project? in many ways.
I think it's the last gasp of that kind of, not necessarily the EU project. I mean, the EU the EU I think will carry on, but certainly within nation states and within in national politics, I think Macron was the last hurrah for the technocratic third way of doing politics. Whether populists in various countries are going to outright win elections is yet to be seen, but about 1 in 3 people, 1 in 4 people, depending on each election, are voting for populist parties in Europe now. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in the European elections coming up, because that could be a real bloodbath.
Well, we'll see, because by the time this interview comes out, they probably would have happened.
Okay.
So the blood may well be flowing at this point as people are watching this. But it's, I mean, when you were talking about the injuries and all that stuff, I didn't know anything about this, to be honest with you. I can't say I followed it that closely, but it's not like it was there in your face either. You know, do you know what I'm saying? If you watch the news, if you read the news, if you try and keep abreast of all this stuff, you don't come across all this information. And what you're describing sounds a lot more like Russia than a Western European country to me.
Yeah,
Russian.
Better food.
I think that there's.
You've never tried a good borscht, man.
There's 2 sides to it. I mean, one is the indifference, just people are not, in the media, not particularly interested. But 2 is that there are, a lot of Macron fanboys in the British media, including people who write about France. I won't name them, but they're there, and they will say.
I thought he was about to name them.
I'm not. And they will trot out the lines that these people are far right, that these people are all violent, that they're all thugs, and that actually the police have never started anything. It was really interesting. Most recently, the government had to actually admit that it lied about one Gilets Jaunes story. So. There's video footage of a load of yellow vests running into a hospital. So the government says, of course, look at these vile, horrible people storming a hospital. How low can you get? It turns out that other footage shows that they were being chased into the hospital by police. And the government actually had to admit that, we got that. That wasn't true. We accept that version of events.
Before we touch on, we're going to talk about internet censorship. How much of this, and I see it reflected in this country as a comedian, you go up and down this country and you play, up north and wherever else, in town and country. How much is this is a clash between the metropolitan elite and the people outside, who essentially have been left behind by globalization? And it's a backlash, and they feel the elite don't care about them, and they're right because they don't.
I think it's exactly that. I think that's I think that you can draw in outcome. I'm nervous about drawing parallels. I wouldn't draw. For instance, I wouldn't draw. I think there's a lot of similarity between the kind of people who voted for Brexit, the kind of people who vote for Trump, the kind of people who are voting 5-star in Italy, the kind of people who are marching in the streets of Paris in their yellow vests. The outcomes are obviously very different. The comparison is there, certainly. And yes, they are, these are the people who are ignored. And I don't really like the phrase left behind for whatever reason. Is something about it that...
It's because they're right behind.
Yeah, I think they were pushed behind.
Yeah.
I think that they've been quite deliberately cut out from politics, not just, Anyway, sorry.
We let you. We paused there because we wanted you to say something even more provocative. So
what do you want me to? I was thinking of saying something.
Well, the point I guess you're making is that it was much easier to have these working class voices that were often concerned about immigration, let's say, rather than have the debate about immigration. You just go, no, you're all a bunch of racists, and that's much easier.
Yeah, and I think that the liberal establishment have found this fantastic way of preserving their interests. It's absolutely genius, because you only have to criticise any aspect of the setup, and immediately you're derided as far right, racist, whatever. The Gilets Jaunes is a pertinent example of that. There's nothing to do with immigration, but it has to be about immigration in order to silence it, I guess. If you criticise the European Union, this is a classic example, you're a racist. But the European Union is, in my view, quite a racist construct. The fact is that if you look at the external borders of Europe, they're some of the strongest in the world, some of the the longest fences and things like that. It's much worse than Trump's wall. What is happening in Europe? Thousands and thousands of people have died trying to get into Europe because the border is so militarized. In North Africa, they are basically, the European Union is paying militia to put people in camps or to basically round them up, and some people are being sold into slavery. That seems pretty racist to me. But if you do that and you support the European Union, you're immune from the charge of racism. Whereas a working class person who's concerned about immigration is a racist. Or Nigel Farage puts up a poster with a load of refugees on it. That's racist, and that needs to be outright condemned. But if you either support or preside over one of the most brutal borders in the entire world, well, you're not racist because you're supporting this wonderful project. So there's an entirely selective use of words like racist and far right, and I think it's to the benefit of basically the liberal elites. They've created a moral force shield for their ideas and for their way of life and for their setup.
Reading that article you wrote in Spite, what actually I found quite affecting was you talking about the poverty the Gilets Jaunes live in, and then how much money Macron spent at this time, I think, in order to refurbish his offices.
That was what everyone was annoyed about. One of the weeks that I went, everyone was saying, Macron had spent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of euros refitting his carpets, and it played into this image of Macron, which I think is quite real, of him as a kind of almost monarchical figure. They call him the president for the rich, which I think is quite true. But he doesn't help himself because he has this haughty attitude, and he thinks that he deserves to be able to refit his carpet for hundreds of thousands of euros at the taxpayer's expense. He thinks that he basically wants to transform France into a kind of nation of startups, where we're all just sitting in Paris on our laptops, and I mean it has no connection to real people's lives. He's very rude to poor people. He can't even have a normal conversation with an ordinary person. He slagged off a bunch of factory workers as illiterate. He was talking to a young unemployed farmer and just says, "Well, I can get you a job. Why don't you just walk down the street?" He once described the people that are left behind, so to speak, as people who are nothing. And that was when he was trying to be nice about them. So it's good to see some of the Gilets Jaunes saying, we're the nothing people.
It sounds like the Russian former president, now Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, he went to Crimea and he was surrounded by all these old ladies. And they were all saying, "Look, we have no money. Can you raise our pension?"
Yeah.
And he went, "Sorry, there's no money left," and got in his helicopter.
A similar thing happened with Macron. There was pensioners, pensioners assailing Macron, and he's like, "Well, I don't understand what you're complaining about." Their pensions are nothing. It's like people are living on, pensioners especially living on, a few hundred euros a month, and he's saying, "Well, what do you want me to do about it?"
You touched on earlier about the fact that, fake news and internet censorship. And before, I think there's been a little bit of a sea change now, in that more and more people are seeing the way certain posts get censored. How big is this is a problem at the moment, and is it going to get worse, do you think?
I think it's a massive problem at the moment. I mean, we've already seen Facebook, in the week that we're recording this, or maybe it was the week before, have banned a number of people who they've called dangerous individuals. People like Paul Joseph Watson, Louis Farrakhan, the preacher, and who else? I mean, Alex Jones is already banned, but now you can't even praise Alex Jones. I don't know who'd want to praise Alex Jones, but you're not allowed to do it.
I find him so funny, isn't he?
He's hilarious. I don't know
ridiculous.
Who could find him dangerous. Who could find a man that rants about water turning the frogs gay and say that man is dangerous?
Yeah.
And I think it's funny.
Yeah.
So there's that. I mean, Twitter has banned a number of people, from Tommy Robinson to Carl Benjamin and all these. And you might say, oh, we don't like these people, whatever, who cares? But what I find really worrying is that these, mega companies in Silicon Valley are now seem to have taken on the role of the censor. And they can now decide what is acceptable speech and what is unacceptable speech. And they have absolutely no accountability to us. We can, put pressure on them, I guess. We can write lots of tweets about it.
Until you get banned.
Until you get banned, yeah. I find that really dystopian. And what is most bizarre is that actually people have been arguing for this to happen for a very long time. Lots of people from across the political spectrum have said the problem with Facebook and Twitter is that there's so much fake news, there's so many, there's too many Russian trolls, there's too much racism.
Yep, I agree.
Too much hate speech.
Yeah.
And what are they going to do about it? And now they're doing something about it, and it actually is incredibly dystopian and scary. And it's going to get worse because the government's going to get involved too. And Britain has set out a white paper called the Online Harms White Paper. And basically, it's setting out proposals to have some of the most highly regulated internet access in the so-called free world. Actually, it's probably even worse than China, because at least in China, you can go on a VPN and you can access what you like. Don't tell the Chinese authorities I told you that. But in Britain, they want to have the power to, fine websites if they don't remove posts, and even take down some websites entirely. And I can sympathise with people who say, oh well, who cares? Who cares if Facebook gets a big fine? Who cares if Twitter gets a big fine? They're just big tech, whatever. It's been posed as this war on big tech, but really, it's a war on us, because social media, it's not Mark Zuckerberg mouthing off. It's me and you and people we know, and your friends and family who occupy social media and who use it to speak their mind. So it's always a war on the user at the end of the day.
Well, shit rolls downhill, right? So if they crack down on Zuckerberg, he's going to crack down on all of us.
Yeah.
Because he's going to have to try and protect himself against the consequences of Fraser saying the wrong thing on Facebook.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what it's going to do is it will make those platforms more censorious, because they'll want to avoid getting fined. And now they've tried similar things in other countries. So Germany has a law called the Netzstege, which is the first of.
Sounds so funny.
It does sound funny. All German words sound funny. Yeah. And it's an anti-hate speech kind of law, and it could fine companies tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of euros if they host hate speech. And so the effect that it has had is that Facebook is now just taking down posts left, right, and centre, trying to cover its arse. And one really funny outcome, we shouldn't laugh, but maybe we can take some joy in this, is that the minister who came up with the law and who was promoting the law had one of his tweets taken down.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want to get fined. He'd called an opponent an idiot. This was deemed to be hate speech. It was taken down. Oh, God.
Right, okay. So I agree with what you're saying. I'm going to put forward the counter-argument now, which is, if we look at the Christchurch massacre, which was obviously awful, there was allegations, and I think it's widely accepted that he was, radicalized online with certain, numbers of far-right websites and all the rest of it, and 4chan, I think, was involved as well. Surely do people need to be protected from these types of hateful far-right groups, especially vulnerable young people?
Well, if these groups are out there, I want to know about them, and I want to know how we can counter them. And actually, it's better, potentially, if they're on Facebook and Twitter, where other people are, than if they're shunted off to 4chan, where no normal people are on, these kind of, well, maybe I'm going to get in trouble now with those. They're going to hate me. But if it's funny. It's like when a lot of the people were banned from Twitter and Facebook, they started moving to Gab, and which is like this kind of free speech social network. But if you go on Gab, it's only these people. Yeah. So it's full of it's not. I mean, it's not entirely just hate speech or anti-Semitism or whatever, but there's quite a lot of it. But there's no there's none of us around that could ever challenge it. You know, so it just happens underground, and that makes the problem worse inevitably.
That's what I did. I went on Gab, I checked it out, and after like 10 minutes, I was like, no, I don't want to be here, and I left because it is full of genuine racism, and all people saying the most horrible shit that they can think of, and like you say, no one is there to challenge them. But let's explore another counter argument, which comes up a lot, which is we love freedom, don't we, Fraser?
Yeah,
you
we
love
do,
freedom, don't you, Francis? I love freedom, don't I? These are companies, private companies, pursuing their free will to have people on the platform that they want. You know, if you ran a shop, well, actually, if you ran a shop, you would be forced to do things. But I mean, they're companies doing what they are free to do with their own subscriber base. What's your issue with that?
God, this is the dreaded libertarian argument. I can't stand these people. I have a lot of libertarian leanings, but I'm getting increasingly irritated by quote unquote libertarians these days. No, I think that there is a point at which Facebook and Twitter and YouTube or whatever, and that point is now, that they get so large that they are the new public square, in a sense. You know, you cannot get by in politics, a lot of businesses. You can't really have a normal social life sometimes if you are not on one of these platforms. And so to deny someone the platform to be on there, if you're it's like you're casting them out of public life entirely these days. So I don't think that I don't really care. I don't care about the property rights of Mark Zuckerberg anyway. But even if you were concerned about that, I think it's a much bigger. The problem for public debate is a much bigger issue.
So what you're then saying, inevitably, is we need regulation of the internet.
No, I'm not saying that either. So that's an interesting. But I think that because I know that when we have regulation, it's not going to be in a free speech direction, and it's never going to happen. Governments are only interested in regulating to clamp down on free speech, and I simply cannot see. There's no way that you could have you couldn't really have an internet First Amendment or anything like that. I don't think it would work. But I think it's up to us to really, put pressure on these companies to say that there is an alternate view to the Twitter mob who just wants everyone to be shut down, to say that, we value all voices, even the ones we hate, because we believe in free speech, and to say, and for that to be a kind of competing idea.
I think, touching on what you're saying, I think the problem is the illiberalness of the liberal elite who we talk about, and you see it in cancel culture.
Yeah.
And we saw it in particular the case of Michael Jackson. Of course, there were all those allegations that came out about him and all the rest of it, and people were up in arms. And then they were saying, right, we need to cancel it. We need to get rid of Jackson. We need to everything. And it was just, if you don't want to listen to Michael Jackson's music, that is entirely up to you. But how dare you say to every other person, you are not allowed to listen to it, and I am going to be the moral arbiter of whether you have the choice or not?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we have these self-appointed, moral arbiters. These it's like the new Mary Whitehouses, in a way. It's the book burning mentality, essentially. It's the idea that we're all so stupid and vile that, not only do I not have to listen to this because it'll upset my mental health, I couldn't care less if people think that, whatever, do your own thing, don't listen to it. But it's that other people need to be shielded from it because they will, either it will hurt their feelings or it will, give them bad ideas and that everyone else is unthinking, unable to challenge the things that they see and read, unable to do anything other than simply absorb and agree with it and, become this internet troll over time because there's so much hate out there, and we're all going to just turn into walking Pepe the Frogs unless this stuff is banned and we put a stop to it right now. And the danger is that we lose our ability to argue, and that's what I'm quite worried about. I'm not confident that a 18-year-old now today could make actually a coherent argument against racism, because they never have to do it. Never heard one, right? It's just ban, ban, ban. And that, that is what is making us, it's going to make us stupid in the long term. It's going to make us unable to respond to much more serious political challenges. Because in the end, we can't just pull the plug on if if a far-right movement were to emerge, we're not just going to be able to pull the plug on it. It doesn't work like that. You can't just ban it into existence. I mean, my favourite analogy, I guess, is, hate to make Nazi analogies, but it is true that there were laws against hate speech in Weimar Germany. These big politicians were constantly getting banned, banned for their views on X, Y, Z. It didn't stop it. It didn't help. In fact, it made it worse because they were able to pose as defenders of the truth. Think about Tommy Robinson, right? The fact that he is persecuted by the British state, which he is, I'm not a fan of his, but I think that's true, gives him more credence because it says, these are the things I'm saying, what they don't want you to hear, and therefore I'm the person telling the truth and they are the liars. So we have to be really, really careful with censorship. Censorship is more dangerous than free speech.
I always take it back to about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe about 8 years ago, when they had Nick Griffin on Question Time.
Yeah.
And he was just destroyed.
It was a fantastic moment.
Yeah, it was destroyed. And any chance of him being a credible political force evaporated because if you were a sound mind, you just looked at him and you went, oh, you're clueless and out of your depth.
Yeah. And and you need to be able to expose wrongness in order to tackle it. You can't just assert that something is bad and shunt it away. The Nick Griffin episode is exactly that, I think.
But I'm curious about your point about not needing regulation and being worried about it, because obviously I understand the mistrust of government 100%. Yeah. On the one hand. On the other hand, I think this idea that, TRIGGERnometry and Spiked and a few other people who care about free speech are just going to get together and put pressure on Twitter and Facebook and Google.
Well, we've got a meeting with Zuckerberg on Friday, haven't we?
Yeah. Yes, we have about our future upcoming bans, about how we're going to get banned from everything. But I think this idea that there's going to be enough of us putting that pressure, I don't see that as a credible way to deal with. I mean, look at, as you know, I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump, but if you look at that leaked Google meeting video, did you ever see that?
Was that the kindly censor one or something like that?
I don't remember, but basically the day after, they had a massive meeting after Trump's election in 2016, and they were all in tears, crying and going on about how we must never let this happen again.
Yeah.
Right? This is people at Google.
Because they think that they did it.
Yeah.
They think
they allowed it.
Yeah, no, but they honestly think that highly of themselves, that they, created this monster or whatever. I mean, it's nothing to do with them.
So but my point is, I don't think that people respond to incentives, right? I don't think you and me and a few other people complaining about the need for free speech is ever going to be a strong enough incentive for a huge tech company to allow people the freedom to speak, which is why I think we will eventually have to have some kind of First Amendment for the internet of some kind.
Well, I think what we need is you're right. A few of us talking about it is not going to change the world, but what we need is a broader cultural shift. The problem is that culturally free speech is not valued, and there's no reason why it couldn't be in future. I mean, the thing, the First Amendment is a good example because, obviously there is a First Amendment in America, but it's not as if, you go on a college campus or whatever and they have free speech. Far from it. Right? There's a hostility to free speech among a lot of young politically active people, and you can't tackle that through legal means. That requires a cultural change, and it's going to be a hell of a lot of work. It's not going to come easy at all.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with you there, because we had Jeffrey Miller on the show, who you may know, and he was talking about free speech on campuses in America. And one of the things he was talking about is actually Donald Trump he's put in threats, and he's made threats that universities or colleges that don't uphold the First Amendment principles will lose funding and stuff like that. So the law, if it's correctly calibrated, can be used to mandate freedom. It can be used to do that. If you have a law, for example, that says that you can't murder me for what I say, that allows me to speak freely in a way that I otherwise might not.
I mean, my view is that a free speech crackdown is kind of a contradiction in terms. And it's something we tried in Britain, actually. I remember talking about it a couple of years ago. You know, the government put out this thing, you know, we're going to promote free speech on campus. It didn't go anywhere. It's not going to change. It's not going to win hearts and minds, and it's not going to stop people from thinking, you know, the underlying ideas which are the problem, which are that today people think that speech is violence, or, you know, that hurt feelings are the end of the world, that you know, speech inevitably leads to bad speech inevitably leads to disastrous outcomes. And people also just seem to think that speech can't be countered with more speech. So I think it's a more fundamental battle than anything that could be solved by the flick of the pen.
And why do you think free speech, we talk about it a lot, and immediately, again, the far right slur comes up, and then, you know, they always joke about it with, you know, people make slurs about, you know, TRIGGERnometry, go, oh, they're right wing, they're obsessed with free speech. Why is wanting a freedom of speech right wing?
It's because of your voice, mate.
Yeah, I do have a racist voice.
I don't think there's anything right wing about it. I mean, it's an incredibly, it's actually a really radical idea. You know, the idea that everyone should be allowed to speak, that should be permitted to speak, and should be trusted to listen to everyone, right? I mean, traditionally it has been the right that has sought to clamp down on free speech. You know, whether that's through censorship of the theatre, or, you know, we had Mary Whitehouse in the 80s complaining about sex and all that stuff. It's only, I suppose, there's always been censorious elements in the left, of course. I mean, we had Stalinism, for Christ's sake. It's not, you know. But it's interesting that in the 60s in America, you know, you had a lot of radicals and kind of hippie types who were very pro-free speech. And they recognized that free speech was a tool for them to effect social change and to, you know, make the changes that they wanted. There would be no civil rights movement without free speech. There'd be no feminist movement without free speech, because...
Let's ban it.
Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, that's Konstantin's Russian side coming out.
But I mean, it's a recent shift, I guess. That I think at the moment, I think, you know, to be honest, I think there are a lot of people on the right who are maybe bad faith defenders of free speech, and you know, it's politically convenient at the moment for them to defend free speech because they are the ones being censored. In a different time, maybe would it be the left standing up for free speech because they're being censored? It's interesting. I mean, to talk about the one instance where I've heard someone from the Labour Party in the last few years talk about free speech was in relation to the anti-Semitism scandal, where they say, but why can't we say what we like about Israel and, you know, Zionism and stuff like that? And you're right, yeah, why shouldn't they say what they like? But they wouldn't defend free speech in any other circumstance. So, you know, the free speech is not so much a left-right issue, but I think who supports it, who's against it, depends very much on where we are, you know, in a period of time. And at the moment, culturally, the right are on the back foot, and so so it's their speech that's being suppressed, and we need to defend their free speech.
And that's what happens is we seem to be in this world now where we play this association game all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you believe in free speech. Who else believes in free speech?
Yeah.
Let's ignore all the people in the middle. Let's go to the far right. Oh, you and this guy believes in free. And it's always about, like, who can you associate with this particular view? And we're constantly playing this, like, 6 degrees of white supremacy. Like, how do you connect this person?
That'd be a great board game. Six degrees of white supremacy would be brilliant. What I particularly wanted to ask you about is this culture of fear that has now started, which I've seen a lot. And, you know, I work in comedy where it's ultra liberal, and then you do the classic over the shoulder, blah, blah, blah. I was in, last week, I was in a burger restaurant with my girlfriend, and a chap sat down next to me, recognized me from TRIGGERnometry, looked over his shoulder and said, thank you for what you're doing, and then went, almost whispered, but you know you're going to get banned like everyone else. And we do live in this culture of fear where we worry about, you know, things being said or misinterpreted and saying things which aren't controversial in any shape or form, but worrying that it's going to get overheard and people are going to lose jobs, our careers, our reputations are going to get damaged.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think that what's been really interesting over the last few years, is that free speech did seem a bit of I've always been a fan of free speech, but it was once a bit of a niche issue. It's like what people would say to me, when I'm actually a bit bored about talking about college campuses now, because it's like, no, this is the real world now. But when I was talking about that years ago, people would say to me, why do you care? I was like, well, because there are going to be real consequences if we let this happen. And now ordinary people, who have very normal, average opinions, sometimes in the majority opinion, feel as if they cannot speak, feel as if they cannot speak their mind normally and just say what they think. And that's really, really scary. And that's really, really troubling.
I was doing some research for my Edinburgh show, which I'm doing about this whole SOAS behavioral agreement form contract. And last year in Russia, because I want to contrast what's happening in the UK with what's happening in Russia, 400 people were arrested for things they said online.
Yeah.
Right. Do you know how many people were arrested in this country for things they said online last year?
I know. Well, it's 3,300.
Yeah.
Wow.
And when
9 people per day.
Yeah, when I tell people this, they can't. There is not a single person that I've said this to, left, liberal, right wing, centre, whatever. There's not a single person who has not gone, what the fuck?
Yeah.
But people don't know this, right? So I think a lot of people say to you, well, why do you care about free speech? Because they don't really understand the scale of what's happening.
Yeah. And I think but I think because of the scale of it, and when you point these things out to people, I think people realise that it is actually something that affects you and me and your mum and your gran.
Well, it definitely affects my mum.
Yeah, because it's not just honestly, it isn't just about far right agitators anymore. It's about completely normal opinion. I mean, think about the way that people might suppress their views on Brexit, which most people are in favour of. Think about the way that people might suppress their views on the trans issue. Right, most people, if you look at polling, don't think that men can become women overnight. They're not bigots for thinking that; they just think that, and but you can't express that view because it's hate speech or whatever. Perfectly normal.
But is it, Fraser,
opinions.
hold on, the counter-argument might be, well, look, you're free to express your opinion about Brexit, and the fact that your neighbour might not like you and throw dog poo over the garden wall doesn't mean that you're being censored.
Well, I think if it is possible to be censored. I mean, censorship doesn't just come from the state slamming its boot on your face. There are many ways that people can be silenced, whether it's just through through fear, through feeling that you can't express a certain view. There is also low-level kind of low-level policing of these things as well, with around hate incidents. So technically, someone has been reported to the police for voting for Brexit, and the police have recorded that as a hate incident. So it can happen. There's no consequences to that for you legally, but that's pretty scary, right? Or there was a guy who posted a limerick about transgenderism on his Twitter, and he gets a phone call from the police. They're not going to arrest him, but that's still pretty scary. They find out where he works, and so there is a kind of creeping authoritarianism that I think that people should, people are right to be a bit wary of, right to be afraid of. Whether people are being censored directly is, by the by, I guess.
But I the point I've made to people as well is, look, even if someone got arrested and then didn't get prosecuted, if you arrest 3,000 people a year for saying something and you don't then prosecute them, that is still the government intimidating citizens into not doing something. Because if you were to do something and got arrested for it 5 times and never prosecuted, you'd still be worried about it. Yeah. Right?
Well, you'd be worried. I mean, it's you could be arrested, you could be sacked, you could be at the end of a Twitter storm, right? It doesn't even involve the government or your employer, but you would feel so much, the pressure on you to shut up and to stop saying what it is you're saying, or to recant for what you've said, is so great that it does, amount to a form of censorship.
We've got time for one more question?
We've got, and it's a question we always end on, which is, what's the one thing we're not talking about that we really should be talking about as a society?
Bloody hell. That's a big one. I haven't thought of one.
Yeah. It's all right.
Can I have a second?
Yeah, have a
of course.
second.
Yeah, have a
Oh, by the way, I realised we talked about Brexit, and we voted Remain because we're good people. We needed to get it in there. We always do that. We're actually going to bring out a range of T-shirts.
Yeah.
We voted for Remain, we're good people.
Yeah, because we're good
Because
people.
we're good people.
Yeah, so we display our virtue wherever we go.
Because that is the selling point of Remain, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're a good person.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, that's what they're all there for.
Yeah.
I went to the Remain march, and it's scary how many good people there are. The one thing that people aren't talking about is, I think, class. And it's interesting that in an age of identity where we are, and of intersectionality, I suppose, we're obsessed with dividing people into these little boxes of race, sexuality, gender, and we'll even invent new boxes for people who fancy it. But what we really ignore is class, and I think it's really important because it's not just an identity actually, and if it was an identity, I wouldn't care about it. It's about your position in society, and I think that one thing that the kind of identity politics of the elite has really done successfully is to mask those divisions. I think that's the real dividing line. And they've managed to almost paper over the cracks ever so nicely. And if you obviously speak up about these things, then you're in trouble because you're a bigot, because you're questioning, as I said before, they have this moral force field around them, and you can't question them. And yeah, so class is the one thing that I think that people should be talking about, be thinking about a lot more. And, it should inform how people see the world.
Oh, God, Francis is going to keep banging on about his working class roots. Yeah. I've taught in Croydon, mate. What time are you setting?
What time am I setting? I'm setting
the working class comment timer.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got 3 seconds. I'm working class again.
Yeah.
Is that what you're going to do?
I'm not. I'm lower middle class, actually, but there we go.
Oh, I see banging on about class again.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can't win.
No, I can't win.
Everyone's talking about it anyway. That's
All right, Fraser, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a brilliant interview. Follow Fraser on Twitter. Remind us your Twitter handle.
At Fraser Myers.
Also, as well, you've got a Spiked podcast if you want to promote it.
Yeah, it's called The Spike Podcast. So, and we do that every Friday. We talk about 3 different, exciting and spicy topics in the news. So check it out.
Yeah, check it out. Absolutely. As always, follow us on all the social media at TriggerPod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Click the bell button next to the subscribe button to make sure you get notified when a video comes out. And as Francis always likes to remind us, a lot of people are getting randomly unsubscribed from our channel. So if that is you, please comment on the YouTube video or send us a tweet if you're a listener, and we'll complain to YouTube and they will do absolutely nothing.
Absolutely. And I thought about doing this actually as a social experiment. We got a brilliant clip we had was of Andrew Doyle talking about woke comedy. And it refused to get promoted by Facebook, right? And they would just say because it contravened their terms and conditions. And I'm going to do something. I'm going to want it to do. Let's see if we can try and make that clip go viral. So with our if you listen to Triggernometry or you watch it, you've got a Twitter account, you've got a Facebook. Tomorrow I'm going to put it up. We're going to tag lots of people. Let's see if we can make it go viral against those bastards' best wishes.
Sounds great. Oh, speaking of woke comedy,
yeah,
I'm doing a show in Edinburgh, Francis.
Yes, you are. You are absolutely. Yep.
This is where you say something nice about it.
Yeah. It's going to be great. Okay.
You bastard.
Yeah. But yeah, where is it? And
it's called All Well That Ends Well. It's about freedom of speech, and it's going to be at 7 p.m. at the Gilded Balloon. Tickets are already on the Edinburgh Fringe website, so grab yourself a ticket. Yeah, we'll see if I can get Francis to squeeze in a joke.
Okay, right, absolutely. Yeah, it's going to need some. No, it's not. It's going to be brilliant. Go and watch it. But guys, thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Bye bye.
See you in a week. Bye bye.
Now here's the form that you were asked to It said, by signing this contract, this is the UNICEF on campus at SOAS, right?
He was asked to sign an agreement that his routine would not contain racism, sexism, classism, ageism, ableism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-religion, anti-atheism.
I think you're doing some quite complicated mental arithmetic to offset the fact that people didn't think you were funny. I think the reality is...
These students saw me performing a top-secret comedy club.
You have absolutely no sense of humour, do you?
I feel like you're just sort of being a bit of an alt-right, you know.
Oh, all right. We got there in the end. You did call me Nazi. Very good.
The good thing about being called a Nazi comedian, right, is I now got a niche. Problem is, I haven't got any racist, sexist, homophobic jokes.
The idea of being a student at university where you can't make any joke about anything in case these poor little woke students get upset or triggered. Get over yourselves.
It's not about comedy, it's about ordinary people up and down the country and here in Britain and in America feeling like they can't say what they think.
I really don't, I get it, especially the women who want to become men. I get it. Do you remember when Gareth Bale, right, went from Tottenham to Real Madrid? The guy left a perfectly good club for more money.
Everybody feels like we're all kind of under arrest. We're all everything we say can and will be used against us in the court of public opinion. And they're coming for the comedians first because we're the ones that, as you say, are allowed to transgress. But everybody else feels it, and that's why the story's got the resonance that it has.